We're at Defense 24 Days here in Warsaw. I'm very pleased to announce my next guest, a very special guest, General Philip Breedlove, Supreme Allied Forces Commander for NATO here in Europe from the years 2013 to 2016. Sir, thank you very much for taking the time to sit down with us.
It's good to be back.
Now, achieving strategic autonomy in Europe, that seems to be the talk of the town, the talk of the continent. You, sir, know very well what that means. Based on what we're seeing with these recent political and geopolitical developments, do you think Europe is up to the challenge, and can Europe achieve this within a relatively short time frame?
Well, I hate to say it, but the answer is it depends. I do believe that Europe can accomplish its goals, but it will take political will and it will take the will of the people. If Europe decides that they're going to prepare, invest, it will take some amount of time, but they can get there. And frankly, as we've seen in Ukraine, Mr. Putin's army is not 10 feet tall. Maybe they're 5'6" or something like that. And so I do believe that given the determination, the will of the people, that the Europeans can make it happen.
In your assessment, at the current moment, does Europe possess enough deterrence to prevent Russian aggression on NATO member states without the United States Article 5 guarantee?
Okay, that's a tough question. Frankly, in the Russian diminished capacity of their army right now, I believe that if Europe shows determination and political will, they can deter Mr. Putin. But what will happen, especially if there's an end to the conflict in Ukraine, of course, Mr. Putin will begin to rebuild his army, refurbish his army like he did after 2008, like he did after 2013 and 14. And like he did at the beginning of this war when he got kicked out of the northern part of Ukraine, we'll see Mr. Putin begin to rebuild. And a fully functioning rebuilt Russian army without the United States, that's a pretty tough demand.
Now, another hot topic here, not only in Europe, but especially here on the eastern flank, is nuclear weapons, the nuclear umbrella provided by the United States. Again, I'm sure you don't like to do hypotheticals, but if there is no nuclear umbrella provided by the United States, Europe is at a disadvantage due to the number of nuclear weapons that both Great Britain and France possess. Should Poland begin to explore potential proliferation of nuclear weapons as a nuclear deterrent, to bolster the nuclear deterrent?
Now, this is a really hard question. I belong to that group that hopes that we don't have nuclear proliferation into the future. But I'm also a realist. And what we see now with people beginning to doubt the U.S. commitment, we see more nations, not only in Europe, but in Asia. Asia is watching what's happening in America. And they see America pulling back from its commitments from the Budapest Memorandum of '94, from its Article 5, etc. And so we see some number of nations beginning to think about starting or accelerating programs for nuclear weapons. Again, my personal thoughts are, let's don't go there. Let's make sure that America is committed to this Article 5 and to this nuclear umbrella of Europe. And if Mr. Putin sees a committed America, then we don't have to have nations go after nuclear weapons. Again, I'm a realist. I believe that there are nations out there, if they think that America is not in the game, they will begin to develop their own weapons. And I think that would be a shame.
Now, concerning the U.S. nuclear umbrella over Europe, I mean, we've seen Russia somewhat modernizing some of its weapons. They now possess hypersonic weapons, but we're still, I believe, in the test phase.
They didn't perform very well in Ukraine is the result we see.
Right. Patriots work pretty good, don't they?
Well, they do, plus the hypersonics, they weren't hitting military-style targets. They were hitting apartment buildings and condominiums.
Certainly, but I guess what I'm trying to get to is what does the United States need to do to modernize its nuclear deterrent here its nuclear sharing here?
It's an incredibly good question. So what we know, and we can't go very far before we get classified, but what we know is that America has announced that it is upgrading and modernizing and giving more capabilities to its B-61 gravity fall weapon. That's not classified, it's open source, and you can even read about some of those upgrades to that weapon. That's important. One of the things we know about U.S. nuclear weapons is they will work. We test, we do things that assure us they're going to work. But what I would say, and I think it's a challenge, is we see that Russia has developed some of these micro-nuclear weapons, very small yield weapons, and they have produced them in pretty significant numbers. And so the West really has no answer to those. You know, we like to talk about proportionality and so forth in a response. And we don't have these micro-nuclear weapons like Russia has developed. So I think that there are hard decisions that are going to have to be made into the future by the United States and others to be prepared for this wider menu of options that Russia brings to the table.
Wow, fascinating. Now, we turn to Ukraine. You were the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces here in Europe when, during the annexation of Crimea, you were the first to suggest bold measures to the political leadership to prevent further encroachment into Ukraine and not recognize taking of land by force, and to make Ukrainians change the way that they train and fight the battle towards NATO standards. Looking back all the way then and what you're seeing from Ukrainian forces today, what can you tell us? Are you surprised? Are you delightfully surprised? Are you...
At first I was surprised, but pretty quickly I got over that because this Ukrainian military is the most adaptable, agile bunch I've ever seen. They took a tiny air force, a tiny old and technically old air force, and they held the entire Russian Air Force at bay. Russia still doesn't own air superiority over the battlefield in the eastern parts of Ukraine. And so Ukraine has done some amazing things. I think right now today, Ukraine is the leading nation when it comes to drone technology in the world. I think that Ukraine today is the leading electronic warfare capability military in the world. There are things that Ukraine has done. They're fighting an existential fight against a world superpower, and they're doing it by themselves. Yes, they're getting some help as far as material from other nations, but nobody's in there fighting with them. Think about this. Russia, a world superpower, had to ask North Korea to help them come retake sovereign Russian land. And Ukraine is facing Russia all by itself, essentially, when it comes to manpower. So yes, I'm pleasantly surprised. We're going to learn a lot from what Ukraine has done. And yes, they still have some technical challenges. They don't have an air force like Poland's air force. They don't have some Navy like the U.S. Navy or some of the European navies. But I'm going to tell you, we in NATO stand to learn a lot about how land warfare is conducted from the Ukrainian forces. And so, yes, I'm presently surprised.
In your opinion, do you think it's in the United States' national interest to see this war through with an independent, sovereign Ukraine? Have you ever seen any point in history since the end of World War II where we have been presented with such an ideal opportunity for partnership?
Yes and no. So yes, it's in our best interest to see Ukraine survive as an independent, sovereign nation. And we should never, never, never acknowledge any Russian occupation. You use the word annexed, I never use that word. Russia is occupying Crimea. And so we should never, in any way, shape, or form, acknowledge any of Russia's invasion into Ukraine as any sort of sovereign Russian result. I think the way you asked the question, the second question, my answer is no. We have never seen such a great opportunity as this to really bring a partner aboard. The nations will do what they do as far as whether Ukraine ever comes into NATO or whatever. But even if they don't come into Ukraine, or even if Ukraine doesn't come into NATO, I'm sorry, making them a partner like Finland and Sweden were before they became allies, this is incredibly important. We want to exercise with them. We want to train with them. We want to share our tactics, techniques, and procedures because we have a lot to learn from them and they have a lot to learn from us.
General Breedlove, thank you very much for sitting down with us and discussing this with us on TVP World. Very much appreciated.
Good to see you here in Warsaw.
And that concludes this interview here from Defense Days 24. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.